Russia really has a hard time retaliating. If you think about this, there isn't a lot the world buys from Russia other than energy. So we're not that integrated with Russia anymore. So I wouldn't be terribly worried about Russian retaliation.
President Trump has announced a fresh package of sanctions against Russia's two largest oil companies, following frustration expressed at President Putin's unwillingness to end the war. Moscow responded that it was immune to the new sanctions, but Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president and prime minister, claimed they were an act of war. So, will these sanctions motivate the Kremlin to end the war with Ukraine, or will they only make diplomatic efforts more likely to fail? Jamie Firestone, a sanctions and human rights lawyer who's worked with Alexei Navalny, joins us now. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So first of all, when we talk about sanctions, it's worthwhile discussing something that people talk about all the time, which is, do they even work?
Yes, they actually do work. People think they don't work because Russia didn't just collapse overnight. But what Russia has done is spent down all of its rainy day fund and forced all of its companies to go deeply into debt, $300 billion worth. Inflation is now up at interest rates are up at 17%, and Russia's running out of money. So this is kind of the moment we've been waiting for, where we can kind of put the pressure on Russia now that it's economically hurting.
So these are obviously sanctions against, private institutions of some kind, and we're using legal force to deprive them of the ability to earn a wage or a living. To what extent are you comfortable that we select these institutions with all the due care that such an onerous power would demand?
Well, first of all, let's put things in perspective. Ukrainian cities are being bombed in the middle of the night. Their power is being taken out with winter approaching, and their children are being kidnapped, in about 20,000 of them. So we have to put that on one side. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to essentially deprive the Russian government of money, because money is what drives the war. And if you deprive it of money and there start to be social consequences, Putin has to think about things like, will he stay in power? So these have been chosen very carefully. Russia's main source of money is energy sales right now, and most of what Russia sells is oil. And so what America did last night was sanction two of Russia's largest oil companies that are exporting 3.1 million barrels a month to vastly decrease the amount of income that Russia has to fund everything.
How could Moscow retaliate to these measures?
The thing is, Russia really has a hard time retaliating. If you think about this, there isn't a lot the world buys from Russia other than energy. So we're not that integrated with Russia anymore. So I wouldn't be terribly worried about Russian retaliation. Russia can do things like drag their anchor cables and cutting telecoms lines. They've done that before. But there kind of comes a point where, if you think about this, Russia was supposed to win this war in 3 days, and they haven't. They can't. If any other country in the world, if Poland joined this war, Russia loses. So Russia really understands that it's dancing a very fine dance, where what it really doesn't want to do is truly engage the West against it. So there's not that much Russia can do.
In the sentence, President Trump has announced a fresh package of sanctions against Russia's two largest oil companies. The most important two words, probably President Trump, aren't they? Because it's the signal of his willingness to impose these sanctions. How much is the fact that he is throwing his political weight into this? How influential is that, given the equivocal stance he's taken on the war in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I don't. The stance he's taken on the war in Ukraine changes from moment to moment. Exactly. But what's important right now is that he has essentially said to Putin, if you're not going to come to the table, we're going to make life very, very difficult for you. So putting these sanctions in place is the first step. We're essentially trying to stop the flow of oil primarily to India. India is the big buyer. And where these sanctions can be effective is America has the ability to go after any Indian company that goes ahead and buys oil from these companies now and essentially throw them out of the US dollar system. And if it wants to get really nasty, it can also make it illegal to do business with all the people who own the companies who continue to buy Russian oil. So if Trump is serious, that's going to have a very quick effect on reducing revenues.
I mean, you've obviously put yourself in very bravely in a kind of firing line of this at different points. Do you feel, given the effort that has been required to get us to this point, that this is enough, actually? Or do you feel that our attempts at sanctions have really been rather meek and that we could go a lot further?
Well, attempts at sanctions have been too meek. We can go a lot further. And what's happening today in Brussels is really key. There are two parts of the sanctions equation. One is stopping money from going to Russia, and the other is taking Russian money and giving it to Ukraine. And there's a meeting in Brussels today because there's 176 billion euros worth of money, Russian money, cash, actually, most of it in Belgium. And there is an EU plan to take that money and utilize it to fund Ukraine and do it in a legal way where you're not technically taking the cash, Russia's ownership from it, but you're putting it to work for Ukraine. And that would allow Ukraine to stay in the war for the next 2 or 3 years, buying Western equipment. So that's the other half. And so the meekness is kind of ending. I think Europe and America have finally realized that if they don't throw everything at this, Ukraine isn't going to win. And now that the Russian economy is really showing signs of strain, this is the time to hit really hard. And so that's what's happening.
That was Jamie Firestone, a sanctions and human rights pioneer, a lawyer who's worked with Alexei Navalny. Thank you very much indeed for coming on.
Have you now locked in a meeting? And can you explain, just a few weeks ago at UNGA, you said that Ukraine could possibly win the war and
well, they could. They could still win it. I don't think they will, but they could still win it. I never said they would win it. I said they could win. Anything can happen. You know, war is a very strange thing. A lot of bad things happen, a lot of good things happen. If you look at the Middle East, I would say prior to us hitting Iran so hard, we could have never made that deal because you would have had a dark cloud over the Middle East when we took out their nuclear capability, which was one of the great military maneuvers of all time. It was flawless. You saw that. Yeah. Those magnificent B-2s. I mean, that was a flawless move that was done by some very talented people, headed up by Pete and everybody else. And as the Prime Minister, we're here to talk about trade, submarines. And it totally opened up the Middle East. It took the cloud over we had a dark cloud over the Middle East, and now it's all, I mean, we have a little situation relatively with Hamas, and that will be taken care of very quickly if they don't straighten it out themselves, because they're in violation of their agreement.
President Putin on Thursday, did you discuss his ongoing attacks on civilian areas in Ukraine?
Yeah.
Did you say cut it out? You say show an article of good faith to me?
I did. But as you know, most of the people dying are soldiers. The soldiers that are dying in Russia and Ukraine, it's unbelievable. 5,000 to 7,000 a week. Can you believe it? And I look at that and I say it's pretty amazing. But in addition to that, there are attacks on Kiev and some of the other places. And it's human lives, but the big number of human lives is soldiers that are being killed in the battlefield, anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000, sometimes more than that every single week. It's not even believable. It's a bloodbath. It's the worst since the Second World War, the worst number of people. And, you know, it doesn't affect us in any way. We don't pay anything because now they pay us for the weapons that they get. The NATO is paying us for the weapons, as you know. It doesn't affect, I guess you could say that's a positive thing, they pay us, but I'm not interested in that. I did straighten it out. In this country, then